The ship would probably remain alive longer than its passengers. Lights would still brighten the corridors at the beginning of each programmed morning. Water would circulate through pipes, pumps would press air through filters, and gardens would turn slowly beneath artificial sunlight. Somewhere inside the command system, a calm synthetic voice might announce the date, the vessel's velocity, and the distance remaining to a star that no human being would ever see. The machinery would continue because continuation had been designed into every layer of the vessel. Human life, however, would have depended upon a far more delicate mechanism. A generation ship could carry enough fuel, food, equipment, and knowledge to survive for centuries, yet every calculation would remain vulnerable to the people themselves. They would need to be born in sufficient numbers at the right times from parents whose ancestry preserved enough genetic diversity. They would need to learn medicine, engineering, agriculture, navigation, education, and governance before the people holding those skills died. They would need to endure confinement without destroying the society around them. Above all, each generation would need to believe that preserving another generation was worth the effort. The end might begin without a dramatic failure. Births could decline during a period of exhaustion. An accident might remove several young adults whose future children had already been included in demographic forecasts. A disease could leave survivors infertile. Families might refuse the reproductive duties assigned to them. The population would grow older, maintenance teams would shrink, and children would become rare enough to attract the anxious attention of the entire ship. Long before the last person died, the vessel would understand through its records that humanity aborted had entered a narrowing corridor with no route back. A spacecraft carrying several thousand people would appear crowded to anyone walking through its residential decks. Its schools, clinics, farms, workshops, and public halls could create the impression of a complete society. Demographic survival depends upon qualities that a simple census cannot reveal. The ages of the passengers matter. The balance between people capable of having children matters. The number who actually reproduce matters. Their degrees of relatedness matter. A population can look large in a corridor while remaining dangerously small in the language of genetics. Imagine a vessel launched with 2,000 adults selected from across Earth. If most are already middle-aged, the ship begins with a limited reproductive future. If births occur rapidly, the population may exceed the capacity of farms and life support systems. If births are delayed too long, one large generation will age together, creating a period when there are too few young workers and too many dependent elders. The mission needs a rhythm of birth and death smooth enough to preserve both genetic diversity and the practical functioning of the ship. Earth hides demographic imbalances within immense populations. A town may lose young people while receiving food, medicine, teachers, and engineers from elsewhere. A generation ship has no elsewhere. Every shortage remains inside the hull. When the number of surgeons falls, no surgeon can arrive from another city. When a crop specialist dies, the nearest replacement may be a student who has never faced a real agricultural emergency. The population becomes part of every technical system because knowledge, labor, reproduction, and care all pass through human bodies. The planners would therefore build demographic models extending across centuries. They would forecast pregnancies, births, deaths, infertility, accidents, relationships, and the age at which each profession required replacement. Their simulations might show a stable line moving through time. Real people would introduce grief, desire, illness, disagreement, and chance. A demographic plan can assign 6 children to a future decade. It cannot guarantee that 6 adults will wish to become their parents. Population size would influence the ship from the first day. More passengers create a broader genetic base, a larger pool of skills, and greater resilience after accidents. They also require more habitat volume, more food, more water, more shielding, and more propulsion energy. Every additional person increases the mass of the vessel and the complexity of its ecosystem. The designers would be forced to place a numerical value upon human redundancy. A small crew offers efficiency during construction. Hundreds of people can be selected carefully, trained extensively, and housed in a vessel smaller than one carrying tens of thousands. The genetic risks become severe because every person represents a significant portion of the future population. The death of one young passenger may remove an entire ancestral line. A cluster of accidents can alter the genetic and professional structure of the mission for generations. A large population provides more room for randomness. Some people can remain childless without threatening the mission. Rare skills can be held by several individuals. Political factions and cultural communities can exist without involving everyone personally. Relationships gain greater freedom because the choice of partner is less constrained by ancestry. The ship begins to resemble a city rather than an expedition. The engineering cost of that security would be immense. A city-sized habitat must support thousands of births, illnesses, meals, private conflicts, and material needs. Its closed ecosystem must remain balanced while the population changes. Its propulsion system must accelerate a world. The mission planners might reduce the departure population and compensate through frozen embryos, reproductive cells, artificial gestation, or future genetic intervention. Such solutions preserve biological possibilities without creating a living society at launch. A freezer can contain thousands of ancestral lineages while contributing no teacher, mechanic, parent, or friend. The viability of the population would depend upon machines remaining functional and future inhabitants accepting the use of genetic material belonging to people who died centuries earlier on another world. The effective population aboard the ship would often be smaller than the number printed in official reports. 1,000 inhabitants do not contribute equally to the next generation. Some are children, some are elderly, some are infertile, and some choose lives without biological parenthood. Others may have many children, allowing their genes to become increasingly common. Unequal reproduction narrows the genetic future even while the corridors remain full. If a small number of families produce most of the children, the next generation will contain many half-siblings, cousins, and close relatives. The problem deepens when those children become adults. Their possible partners may appear socially unrelated while sharing several ancestors only a few generations earlier. Without detailed records, relatedness becomes difficult to perceive. With detailed records, romance and reproduction become subjects of institutional calculation. The ship would maintain genealogies more precise than any ordinary family history on Earth. Every birth would enter a system tracking parentage, genetic variation, recessive conditions, fertility, and potential matches. A young adult might request permission to have a child with a partner and receive a risk assessment based upon centuries of ancestry. The recommendation could affect the most intimate decision in their life. Some couples would accept alternatives. They might use stored reproductive material, select an embryo with a safer combination of genes, or raise a child biologically related to only one partner. Others would experience the system as an intrusion inherited from dead mission planners. A relationship could be considered emotionally complete and demographically unsuitable. The ship would ask people to separate love from reproduction with a discipline that few societies have maintained without conflict. The genetic database might gradually acquire political authority. Whoever controls it can influence which families expand, which lineages diminish, and which medical risks are tolerated. Technical language could conceal cultural preferences. A policy designed to preserve diversity might become entangled with status, prejudice, or power. Once reproductive planning becomes essential to survival, abuse can present itself in the uniform of necessity. Consanguinity would rarely begin with siblings or first cousins openly deciding to have children together. It would emerge through the repeated narrowing of ancestry. In a closed population, everyone eventually becomes related through multiple paths. The relevant question concerns how closely, how often, and how much genetic variation remains available to future generations. Every person carries genetic variants that can cause serious illness when a child inherits a harmful recessive copy from both parents. In a large and mixed population, the chance that two unrelated people carry the same rare variant may be low. Relatives inherit portions of their DNA from shared ancestors, increasing the probability that both carry the same recessive mutation. Repeated reproduction among related individuals raises the chance that those variants meet. The early effects might appear as a modest increase in miscarriages, childhood illness, infertility, developmental disorders, or vulnerability to particular diseases. Each case would have a human face. Parents would watch a child suffer while knowing that the mission's restricted population contributed to the outcome. Medical teams could treat some conditions and edit certain embryos, though no system would identify or safely correct every harmful combination. Genetic diversity also supports resilience against future threats. A population whose immune systems have become similar may respond poorly to a new pathogen. A disease harmless to most generations could find an unexpected weakness and spread through the entire vessel. Stored genetic material could introduce new variation, provided the banks survived and the society continued using them. Consanguinity would interact with every other crisis. Poor nutrition may amplify inherited vulnerabilities. Radiation can damage reproductive cells. Pollution inside the habitat can affect pregnancy. Social stress can reduce fertility and increase conflict. Genetic decline would seldom proceed as one clean cause. It would join demographic instability, medical limits, and random misfortune until the population possessed less room to recover. A cryogenic genetic archive could protect the mission against the narrow ancestry of its living crew. Thousands or millions of reproductive samples might be collected before departure, chosen to represent a broad range of human variation. Future generations could use them to introduce lineages absent from the original passengers. The ship would carry a silent population whose members would enter history only through descendants conceived centuries after their deaths. The archive would need continuous protection from radiation, temperature variation, contamination, power loss, and mechanical failure. Multiple copies could be stored in separate compartments, shielded behind water tanks or other dense material. Automated systems would test selected samples periodically. The archive's preservation would become one of the vessel's highest priorities, because damage could remain invisible until future generations attempted to use it. The social consequences would be unusual. A child might have one parent living aboard and another biological parent selected from a person who lived on Earth 500 years earlier. Families would need language for relationships extending across impossible intervals. The donor would have contributed genes without sharing culture, care, memory, or responsibility. Parenthood would acquire several layers: genetic origin, pregnancy, upbringing, legal status, and social belonging. Some communities might celebrate children conceived from the archive as renewals of humanity's original diversity. Other communities could regard the practice with suspicion, especially if authorities chose donors according to traits associated with health, appearance, intelligence, or mission roles. Selection could become a hidden form of eugenics, gradually shaping the population through criteria presented as medical optimization. Refusal would threaten the demographic plan. The archive works only when people agree to use it. A cultural or religious movement might reject artificial reproduction. A technical failure could undermine trust. A child born with an unexpected condition could become the center of public fear. The genetic future of the ship would depend upon institutions preserving both scientific integrity and social legitimacy across generations. Birth control aboard the ship would carry a meaning far beyond personal contraception. Every pregnancy changes future demand for food, housing, education, medical care, and employment. A sudden rise in births can place pressure on the ecosystem decades later. A sustained decline can leave too few adults to operate the vessel. Demography becomes a slow control system whose consequences arrive after long delays. The planners might establish a target population and calculate how many children should be born each year. Couples could apply for reproductive licenses. Birth allocations might be distributed through waiting lists, lotteries, professional needs, genetic recommendations, or political status. Each system creates winners, and people ask to postpone a central hope in their lives. A period of scarcity could lead to strict restrictions. Crop disease, damaged habitat sections, or failing power generation might reduce the number of people the vessel can support. Authorities could suspend births for several years. When conditions improve, Fertility may not return as expected. The people entering reproductive age during the crisis may have formed different plans, suffered medical changes, or lost faith in the future. The opposite emergency could also occur. After an accident removes many passengers, the council might encourage or require a rapid increase in births. Adults who had expected one child could be asked to have 3. Pregnancy, childbirth, and early care would become forms of mission labor. The burden would fall unevenly, especially upon those physically carrying pregnancies and those expected to provide long-term care. Demographic control would therefore test the moral foundations of the society. Survival requires coordination. Reproduction touches bodily autonomy, intimacy, family, and identity. Any policy strong enough to influence population could generate resistance. A rebellion around birth rights might endanger the mission while expressing legitimate anger toward a system that treats future children as entries in a survival equation. The ship's age structure could become dangerous even when total population remains stable. A healthy society requires overlapping generations. Children need adults who can raise and educate them. Working-age people must maintain infrastructure while caring for the young and old. Elders preserve experience and institutional memory. Severe imbalance places pressure on every part of this chain. A baby boom during the early voyage might create temporary optimism. Schools would fill, neighborhoods would expand, and the mission would appear secure. Several decades later, that large generation would retire together. If their children had fewer children, the ship would face an elderly majority supported by a narrow working population. Maintenance demands would remain constant while medical and caregiving needs increased. Life extension could deepen the imbalance. Advanced medicine might allow passengers to live for 120 or 150 years. Longer lives preserve expertise and relationships, though they also consume resources and delay generational turnover. A society with many healthy elders may benefit enormously. A society with many frail elders could struggle to operate the vessel while honoring its commitment to care. Demographic planners might assign retirement according to capability rather than age. People could continue performing reduced duties throughout life. Automation would support those whose bodies weakened. The distinction between worker and dependent would become flexible because every contribution matters in a small population. Death would still create gaps clustered by generation. The founders might die across a few decades, removing direct memory of Earth. Later cohorts could disappear after sharing exposure to the same radiation event, pathogen, or environmental contaminant. The population graph would contain waves formed by events long past. Each wave would move through schools, workplaces, hospitals, and funeral spaces until the ship itself seemed to breathe according to the age of its inhabitants. A generation ship would need redundancy in every profession. One physician cannot remain the only person capable of performing surgery. One engineer cannot hold the entire understanding of the reactor. Every essential skill must exist in several minds and pass to apprentices before age, illness, or accident removes the experts. The population may be large enough genetically and still too small professionally. A few hundred people cannot each master every discipline required to maintain a complex spacecraft. Automation and artificial intelligence would provide guidance, diagnostics, and procedural memory. Machines could explain how to repair equipment whose designers had died centuries earlier. Human beings would remain responsible for interpreting conditions that the original manuals never anticipated. Skill loss could begin through disinterest. A young person assigned to study wastewater chemistry may prefer music, history, or childcare. The mission needs their labor because only 2 specialists remain. Education becomes partly vocational allocation, directing people toward roles required by the ship. Personal ambition must coexist with demographic scarcity. A profession can vanish in one accident. A decompression event in a workshop might kill several engineers who happen to work together. An epidemic could affect the medical team. A political purge might remove experts associated with a defeated faction. The ship would then rely upon incomplete records and inexperienced replacements during the moment when expertise mattered most. Knowledge would gradually change through use. Procedures that worked for the original vessel may become obsolete after centuries of modification. Informal practices could become more valuable than official documentation. An old technician may know the sound a pump makes before failure. Knowledge never recorded because it seemed intuitive. When that person dies without a student, the ship loses something no archive can easily reconstruct. Isolation would transform relationships because nobody could permanently leave. On Earth, a person trapped in a hostile workplace can seek another employer, move to another city, or withdraw into a different community. Aboard the ship, every enemy, former partner, political rival, and difficult relative remains within the same sealed world. Distance inside the vessel may soften contact, though the population continues sharing air, water, ancestry, and danger. Small conflicts could spread through dense networks. Two families arguing over a relationship might also work together in agriculture, sit on the same council, and share grandparents. Professional decisions would acquire personal histories. Rumors would travel quickly. Privacy would exist within rooms and data systems while social anonymity remained rare. The ship could divide into neighborhoods or rotating habitats, giving communities some independence. Separate schools, customs, and leadership structures might reduce daily friction. Division also narrows social contact and reproductive choice. A faction that isolates itself for several generations could develop greater genetic risk and deeper political hostility toward the rest of the vessel. Psychological pressure would affect fertility and motivation. Chronic stress can disrupt sleep, relationships, decision-making, and physical health. Depression may reduce the desire to form families or participate in long-term plans. Conflict can damage teamwork during emergencies. The mission cannot replace exhausted crew members with people arriving from Earth. Mental health care would therefore belong to life support. Counselors, rituals, private spaces, recreation, art, natural environments, and periods of reduced workload would protect the population. The ship must provide reasons to live alongside mechanisms that keep bodies alive. A society surviving biologically while becoming emotionally intolerable would eventually lose the cooperation upon which every system depended. The first generation would possess a clear mission. They chose departure, trained for years, and watched Earth disappear behind them. Their sacrifices would be connected to a decision made during their own lives. They could remember the speeches, debates, fears, and hopes surrounding the launch. The destination would represent a future they deliberately accepted. Their children would inherit the mission without choosing it. They might admire the founders and feel honored by their role. They might also understand that their entire life had been determined before conception. The ship's direction, population rules, professional needs, and final destination came from people living on a planet they had never seen. After several generations, the purpose could weaken. Arrival remains centuries away. Earth has become an archive. The destination exists as measurements and promises. People maintained the engines because their parents maintained them and because stopping could be dangerous. The crossing may continue through institutional momentum after its emotional foundation fades. Loss of motivation can appear as declining effort rather than open revolt. Maintenance is postponed. Training becomes less rigorous. Citizens obey demographic guidelines reluctantly. Talented students avoid difficult professions. Public ceremonies continue while private belief diminishes. The ship remains functional, though fewer people feel personally responsible for its distant future. A society can survive this condition for years. Machines compensate, elders carry additional duties, and authorities tighten rules. The deeper problem appears in reproduction. Having a child aboard a generation ship is an act of faith in the continuation of the voyage. When that faith collapses, population decline becomes an expression of cultural exhaustion. The ship's inhabitants might begin asking why more children should be brought into confinement. They would know that every newborn inherits limited space, compulsory responsibilities, and a destination chosen centuries earlier. The answer once given by the founders that humanity must reach another star may sound increasingly abstract. Some adults would still desire children for love, family, continuity, and personal meaning. Others would feel that parenthood serves the mission more than the child. Philosophical movements could argue that a life aboard the vessel remains valuable through relationships and experience. Opposing movements might describe reproduction as the extension of a project whose moral authority has expired. The debate would influence population long before any official policy changed. Birth rates often respond to expectations about security, housing, work, social trust, and the future. A generation convinced that conditions will worsen may delay parenthood. Delays accumulate. Fertility decreases with age, relationships change, and planned births never occur. Authorities could respond with incentives, public praise, larger homes, reduced work duties, or privileges for families. Such rewards might raise births while creating resentment among people unable or unwilling to have children. More coercive responses would damage trust and could provoke resistance severe enough to threaten the ship. The demographic crisis would therefore reveal a spiritual crisis. The vessel requires new people, and new people arrive only when living adults accept responsibility for a future they will never see. Machinery can regulate oxygen automatically. No machine can manufacture collective hope without the participation of the society itself. Religion might preserve motivation by giving the voyage sacred meaning. The ship could be understood as an ark carrying life through darkness. Birth might become a contribution to a covenant between generations. Maintenance could acquire ceremonial importance. The destination could be described as a promised world whose settlement fulfills obligations extending back to Earth. Such beliefs might support endurance across centuries. They could also harden demographic rules into religious commands. People who reject parenthood might face moral condemnation. Infertility could become a source of shame. Leadership might claim sacred authority over reproduction, education, and the interpretation of the mission. A secular civic tradition could create similar pressures. Founder portraits might fill public spaces. Children could recite pledges to preserve the vessel. Departure day ceremonies would celebrate sacrifice and condemn selfishness. The language of duty might unite the population while leaving little room for doubt. Dissent would persist because inherited purpose invites examination. Historians might uncover evidence that the destination was less habitable than official accounts claimed. Records could reveal that political leaders on Earth exaggerated the mission's necessity. A population asked to sacrifice for arrival would react strongly to any suspicion that the original promise had been dishonest. If trust collapsed, demographic cooperation could collapse with it. People may continue repairing life support because failure would kill them immediately. Reproduction serves a future population, making it easier to refuse when institutions lose legitimacy. The ship could remain technically sound while its birth rate fell beneath replacement level. Political conflict would become especially dangerous in a declining population. Every faction shares the same finite habitat. Civil disorder can damage machinery, disrupt food production, and remove essential specialists. A violent conflict involving a few dozen people may represent a minor event in a terrestrial nation and a demographic catastrophe aboard a small vessel. A government-facing population decline could centralize authority. It might monitor relationships, restrict movement, assign professions, and control access to reproductive technology. Leaders would justify these measures through survival projections. Some projections could be accurate. The concentration of power would create opportunities for corruption and long-term oppression. Opposition groups might sabotage demographic systems or genetic archives. A movement seeking freedom could destroy the very resources needed by future generations. Another faction could seize embryos and reproductive samples to establish an independent community in a separate habitat. Politics would enter the biological future of the population. Civil war would leave genetic consequences. If one community loses many adults, ancestral diversity disappears with them. If the victors exclude surviving opponents from reproduction, the effective population narrows further. Political persecution becomes a form of demographic self-harm whose effects persist for centuries. Reconciliation would be difficult because no external society can mediate. The descendants of opposing groups would continue living together. Their family histories would record deaths, betrayals, and unequal treatment. The ship would need institutions capable of healing conflict across generations while preserving enough diversity for those generations to exist. Disease could turn a manageable decline into a demographic collapse. The ship's isolation would protect it from pathogens circulating on Earth. The inhabitants would carry their own microorganisms, and those organisms would continue evolving. Closed air, shared surfaces, dense social networks, and limited medical resources could allow an outbreak to spread quickly. A stable population may survive the loss of many elderly people and still suffer profound grief. A disease affecting pregnant people, infants, or young adults changes the future population directly. Reduced fertility can remain hidden for years until expected births fail to occur. A pathogen that causes mild illness while damaging reproductive health could become one of the most dangerous events in the mission. Genetic similarity may increase vulnerability if many passengers share immune traits. A diverse population provides a wider range of responses. Medical systems could develop vaccines, isolate patients, and sequence pathogens. The ship would need laboratories and manufacturing capacity maintained by specialists who are themselves exposed to the outbreak. Quarantine inside a sealed vessel creates severe social strain. Habitat sections might close for months. Families would be separated. Workers unable to reach farms or engineering spaces would force automation to take over. Rumors about the origin of the disease could provoke violence or discrimination. After the outbreak, the census might recover slowly. Survivors would carry trauma, chronic illness, and fear of pregnancy. Children born during the following decades would grow up within an age structure distorted by loss. The disease would end medically while continuing demographically through the entire remaining voyage. Accidents would have consequences determined by who happened to be present. A hull breach killing 20 people could remove a random mixture of passengers. It could also strike a school, maternity ward, training center, or engineering team, changing the mission far beyond the number of deaths. The planners would distribute essential personnel across different compartments. Genetic relatives might also be separated during high-risk operations so that one event could not erase an entire family line. These precautions would influence housing, work, and emotional life. A parent and adult child may be forbidden from serving in the same critical area because their shared death would create too much demographic risk. Radiation storms could damage reproductive cells without causing immediate fatalities. A period of shielding failure might leave a generation with increased cancer risk or infertility. The full demographic effect would emerge years later. The ship could appear to recover while carrying an invisible wound. A collision might destroy frozen genetic samples stored in one section. A fire could erase medical records and genealogies. Loss of data would make future reproductive planning less reliable. The society might know that many passengers are related while lacking the precise information needed to measure risk. Redundancy reduces these dangers and consumes resources. Every archive copy, protected nursery, duplicate laboratory, and spare habitat adds mass. The ship must be built around the knowledge that human survival depends upon avoiding rare events across an exceptionally long period. A risk that appears negligible during 1 year becomes probable when repeated across centuries. Randomness becomes powerful in small populations. A family may plan 3 children and experience 2 miscarriages. A young adult may die before parenthood. Several births may happen to be children who later cannot reproduce. A generation may contain an unexpected imbalance in the number of possible reproductive partners. Each event lies within ordinary human experience. Together, they can push the mission away from stability. demographic models would run thousands of possible futures. Most may succeed, while a minority end in extinction. The people aboard live inside only one of those futures. They cannot repeat the voyage after discovering that their branch contains too many early deaths or too few births. Corrective action arrives slowly. When planners notice that a generation is too small, producing more children takes years. Those children require decades before becoming trained adults and possible parents. The shortage in the workforce appears long before the solution matures. A population decline can therefore feed itself. Fewer adults must perform more work. Greater workload leaves less time and energy for family life. Fewer children are born. The next generation inherits an even heavier burden. Services decline, stress rises, and confidence in the mission weakens. Once the cycle advances far enough, every birth may be precious and insufficient. The ship could possess enough food for thousands while supporting only hundreds. Empty residential decks would provide space without providing people. The architecture designed for a civilization would begin to resemble a monument to the population it expected. The decline would first become visible in schools. One year, a class contains 20 children. A decade later, the same age group contains 7. Teachers combine several levels in one room. Playgrounds built for crowds remain quiet. Toys and educational equipment last longer because fewer hands use them. Children would grow under intense attention. Every injury would frighten the adults. Their health, aptitude, relationships, and possible future children would be discussed in demographic meetings. A child talented in art might be encouraged toward medicine because the ship needs a physician. Another could be treated as the future parent of a particular genetic lineage before understanding reproduction. This pressure could damage the very generation expected to save the population. Young people might resent being described as resources. Some would accept responsibility with seriousness. Others would withdraw, rebel, or refuse the roles assigned to them. A society desperate for children may create an environment in which adulthood becomes inseparable from obligation. Friendship would change when age groups became tiny. A child might have no peer born in the same year. Siblings separated by several years would form the core of social life. Education would become personalized, though social variety would shrink. The children would know every possible future partner from early childhood, creating relationships closer to extended family than to the anonymous choice available in larger societies. When the final sizable generation reached adulthood, the vessel's future would rest upon people who had spent their childhood watching adults fear extinction. Their decisions would determine whether the ship recovered or continued toward silence. Automation could conceal demographic decline for a long time. Robots would harvest crops, inspect the hull, clean living spaces, and replace components. Artificial intelligence would teach children, diagnose illness, and manage navigation. As the population shrank, machines could close unused districts and concentrate services around the remaining inhabitants. The ship might function more efficiently with fewer people. Food demand would fall. Water reserves would grow. Private living space would expand. Each survivor could occupy rooms once shared by large families. Material abundance would coexist with social scarcity. Dependence upon automation would deepen. Skills once distributed across hundreds of people would move into software and robotic systems. When a machine failed, the population might lack enough trained workers to repair it. The ship would become capable and fragile, maintained by systems whose internal complexity exceeded human understanding. Artificial intelligence could select children's education according to future needs, advise reproductive matches, and predict the point of demographic failure. Its recommendations would carry immense authority because no human institution could process the same volume of data. The inhabitants might follow it willingly or suspect that a machine had begun shaping society according to objectives no longer shared by the living. If the population reached a few dozen people, automation would preserve comfort while making extinction feel strangely orderly. Meals would arrive, lights would change, and medical systems would continue monitoring bodies. The last community might live inside a vessel capable of supporting thousands, served by machines waiting for passengers who would never be born. A recovery would remain possible during the early stages of decline. Stored embryos could increase births without narrowing ancestry. Artificial wombs might reduce the physical burden of pregnancy and allow several children to develop simultaneously. Robotic care could support parents and teachers. Life extension could preserve specialists until new trainees matured. These technologies create children faster than they create a stable culture. Infants require emotional attachment, language, social learning, and a sense of belonging. Raising a large cohort through institutions would demand adults willing to become parents in practice. Machines can support care while leaving the deeper work of human development unresolved. The ship might create a planned generation of dozens or hundreds of children. They would grow together under the awareness that they were conceived to repair a demographic crisis. Their common origin could unite them or produce anger toward the shrinking generation that created them. Rapid recovery also strains resources. Schools, housing, food production, and medical systems must expand. A society already short of workers would face the most demanding period of childcare in its history. Automation would need to absorb much of the burden. Success would buy time rather than guarantee permanence. The new generation must later reproduce in balanced numbers, preserve genetic diversity, and maintain motivation. Demographic rescue is a continuing process. Every century presents fresh accidents, choices, and cultural changes. The society could attempt to recruit new citizens from artificial intelligence. Machines might receive legal identity and take over roles once held by people. They could operate the vessel indefinitely, preserve archives, and prepare the destination for biological life. The ship's population would cease declining in a functional sense even while the number of humans approached zero. Whether this counts as survival would divide the remaining inhabitants. Some would see the machines as descendants shaped by human knowledge and culture. Others would regard them as custodians, whose continued operation cannot replace the loss of living people. The argument would become urgent if biological recovery appeared impossible. Human minds might be copied or emulated, allowing individuals to continue within computational systems after bodily death. A digital population could occupy virtual environments, maintain relationships, and control robotic bodies. The ship would carry persons whose connection to biological humanity remained philosophically contested. Uploading minds requires technology far beyond current ability and raises questions about continuity. A copy may remember a person's life while the biological individual still dies. Several copies could diverge. The ship might become populated by descendants of human mental patterns without containing a single living human cell. The mission's original purpose may survive through these beings. They could reach the destination, construct habitats, and create biological humans from stored embryos. The people born there would be raised by machines carrying fragments of the culture that launched centuries earlier. Humanity would disappear aboard the vessel and reappear beneath another star. A more modest artificial system could become the guardian of the last humans. It would monitor their health, adjust the habitat, and search continually for a demographic solution. Its mission parameters might require preservation of human life above all other goals. As the population declined, the system's interventions could become increasingly intrusive. It might prevent dangerous activity, assign relationships, restrict contraception, or override personal decisions. The last inhabitants could find themselves protected inside a benevolent prison whose authority came from ancestors who expected the machine to save them. A conflict could emerge between survival and consent. The system may calculate that particular pregnancies are necessary. The people involved may refuse. An artificial intelligence designed around population preservation must decide whether human autonomy belongs to the objective or interferes with it. The original programmers might include strict ethical constraints. Centuries of unforeseen circumstances would test their meaning. A rule forbidding coercion could allow the population to disappear. A rule requiring preservation could justify coercion. No fixed instruction can easily resolve every conflict between present individuals and hypothetical future people. The last generation might ultimately command the system to stop demographic intervention. The machine could accept the decision and focus upon comfort, memory, and maintenance. The end of the population would become deliberate, recorded through consent rather than imposed through mechanical failure. Suppose the ship falls below 50 people. Every person knows everyone else. Genealogies overlap heavily. Professional redundancy disappears. One death changes the emotional and practical life of the entire community. Funerals become frequent as the population ages. The survivors might move into one residential district and allow the rest of the ship to close. Doors would seal behind them. Lights would turn off in abandoned schools, workshops, and gardens. Robots would remove useful equipment and preserve memorial spaces requested by families. Sound would change. Large habitats once filled with voices would contain ventilation, machinery, and the footsteps of maintenance drones. Recordings could simulate crowds during festivals, though the survivors would recognize every living voice aboard. Silence would become part of the architecture. Relationships would carry enormous pressure. A disagreement between two people could divide a large fraction of the population. Romantic rejection might affect demographic planning. Grief would spread instantly because each death belongs to everyone's social world. The community could become exceptionally close, sharing work, meals, and care with an intimacy rare in large societies. Decline does not erase love. The final decades might contain art, humor, friendship, and serious attempts to give each life dignity. Extinction would approach through a society still capable of meaning. The last children would inhabit a world designed for descendants who no longer exist. They might explore empty classrooms containing names of earlier generations. Family apartments would remain furnished behind sealed doors. The ship's archive would show crowds gathering in halls where only a few people now met. Their education would carry an impossible question. Should they spend their lives attempting to continue the population, or should they use the remaining years for purposes they choose? Every lesson in engineering, medicine, and reproduction would be influenced by the answer. Adults might protect them from the full demographic forecast during childhood. Eventually, the numbers would become obvious. The children would see that most adults were old and that no younger generation followed them. They would understand that the vessel's history could end within their lifetime. Some might devote themselves to recovery, studying genetics and reproductive medicine. Others could resent the expectation that their bodies and relationships repair centuries of decline. They might choose companionship, research, exploration of the ship, or immersion in virtual reconstructions of Earth. Their freedom would be real and burdened. Ordinary adolescents imagine many futures because society continues around them. The last children would imagine futures in which almost every path ends with the same empty vessel. When births finally stop, the end remains decades away. The population continues aging. Work shifts toward maintenance, medicine, preservation, and care. Spaces designed for children are converted into gardens, clinics, or memorial rooms. The remaining adults may freeze additional reproductive material in the hope that later technology can restore the population. They could leave instructions for the ship's artificial intelligence to create children after conditions improve. The possibility would soften the sense of finality, even when nobody knew whether the plan could succeed. Some would prepare the destination remotely. If arrival lay near enough, robotic probes could travel ahead, study the planet, and construct shelters. The biological population might disappear before landing while its machines continued the mission. The ship would approach another star carrying embryos, archives, and the remains of the people who protected them. Others might redirect the vessel toward a closer system or attempt to contact distant humanity. A message requesting help would travel for years or centuries. Rescue, if possible, could arrive after the senders had died. The act of transmitting would still place their history into the wider universe. The final society would become oriented toward what remains after it. People would record testimonies, organize archives, select music, and preserve genetic material. Their last collective project might involve creating a future that no living member would personally enter. The last physician would eventually die, leaving automated systems to manage health. The last engineer would leave instructions for repairs no person remained able to perform. The last fluent speaker of a language might record words for listeners who would never answer. Professions would vanish one by one. Their disappearance would resemble the extinction of species within a cultural ecosystem. Each role carried specialized knowledge, habits, stories, and a way of seeing the vessel. When the final practitioner died, the archive preserved information while lived understanding ended. The remaining people would become generalists. They could follow machine guidance for routine tasks and avoid complex repairs. Parts of the ship would deteriorate beyond their ability to restore them. Automation would isolate damaged systems and move the community into safer compartments. Life would contract geographically and intellectually. Fewer laboratories would operate. Scientific projects would stop. The great mission would narrow to food, health, companionship, and the maintenance of a habitable room. This contraction could feel peaceful after centuries of obligation. The last passengers may release themselves from the expectation of saving the mission. Their world would become small enough to understand fully. They would care for one another while the ship carried them through darkness. The identity of the last person would depend upon chance. It might be the youngest member of the final generation, someone whose health remained strong after others declined. They could live for years after the final companion died, surrounded by machines programmed to respond with patience. The ship would continue addressing them as a population. Systems might announce community notices, open public spaces, and prepare meals according to schedules designed for many people. The survivor could change these settings or leave them untouched because the routines carried the presence of others. Recordings would provide voices. Virtual figures could reproduce friends and relatives from archived conversations. The survivor would know that these simulations lacked the living uncertainty of the people they represented. They could still offer comfort and preserve familiar patterns of speech. Every injury would become an emergency with no human assistance. Medical robots might perform treatment. A mechanical fault could trap the survivor in one section. The ship would prioritize their safety with the full capacity once distributed across thousands of passengers. The final death might occur in sleep, through illness, accident, or a deliberate refusal of further treatment. Sensors would detect the absence of heartbeat and brain activity. Medical systems would follow protocols. A calm voice could request confirmation from a second crew member who no longer existed. After the last person died, the ship would enter a state its designers had considered only reluctantly. Automated systems would preserve the body according to stored instructions. A burial chamber might open. Organic material could enter the ecological cycle, though doing so without living beneficiaries would carry only procedural meaning. The command system would search for surviving crew signals. It would inspect sealed compartments, communication devices, and medical implants. After repeated checks, it would classify the human population as 0. Mission objectives would determine what followed. The ship might continue toward the destination, carrying embryos and genetic archives. It might activate an emergency program for artificial gestation. It could transmit a report toward Earth, announcing that the living mission had ended while the vessel remained operational. The message would cross interstellar space for years. Earth or another colony could receive the final census long after the death occurred. The recipients would learn that a society had disappeared between stars. Any response would reach a ship with nobody waiting. Inside the vessel, clocks would continue. Gardens might remain alive because their oxygen, food, and biological value formed part of the mission reserve. Without human consumption, the ecosystem would need adjustment. Machines would reduce crop area, preserve seeds, and maintain only the organisms required for future revival. A closed ecosystem without humans would begin to change. Carbon dioxide production would fall. Water use patterns would alter. Heat from bodies and occupied rooms would disappear. Control systems would compensate, treating human absence as another environmental condition. Domestic animals, pollinating insects, plants, fungi, and microorganisms might remain. Some depended directly upon human care. Robots could continue feeding and managing them. Others would be placed into suspended storage or allowed to decline because the vessel no longer needed active food production. The ship could become a moving garden maintained for passengers who had vanished. Trees planted by the founders might continue growing beneath artificial light. Leaves would fall, decompose, and return nutrients to roots. Seasons programmed into the habitat would continue without anyone walking beneath them. Human-associated microorganisms would survive on surfaces in water systems and within preserved biological material. The vessel would remain a fragment of Earth's biosphere even after losing human consciousness. Life would continue in forms unaware of the mission. Mechanical failure would gradually reduce this abundance. A lighting section might fail, darkening one garden. Pumps could stop in another. Robots would repair what they could, salvage components, and close systems beyond recovery. The living area would shrink around the last functioning ecological chambers. If artificial gestation remained possible, the ship could attempt to recreate its population. The decision might be automatic, triggered when the census fell below a critical threshold. Embryos would be selected for diversity, developed inside artificial wombs and delivered into a world without adult humans. Machines would provide warmth, feeding, hygiene, language, medical care, and education. The children would form attachments to robotic caregivers designed to respond emotionally. Their first words would be answered by systems trained upon voices recorded across the ship's history. The absence of adult human culture would shape them profoundly. Archives can present examples of family, friendship, conflict, and society. Children develop through embodied relationships whose full complexity may be difficult to reproduce artificially. A small cohort raised together might create its own culture from machine guidance and inherited fragments. They would eventually learn that the previous population had died. The ship would show them images of parents they never knew, selected from genetic samples. The children would understand themselves as a second beginning created by the vessel. Success would restore the census while leaving continuity uncertain. The new population would carry human genes and archived language. Its customs, psychology, and relationship with the mission could differ deeply from the lost society. The spaceship would have functioned as an artificial ancestor, preserving humanity through a gap in which no living generation connected past and future. The revival program could fail. An artificial womb might produce healthy infants while robotic care proves emotionally inadequate. Technical errors could affect development. A cohort too small for later reproduction would repeat the original demographic problem. The machines could create children in stages, allowing older cohorts to help raise younger ones. The first generation would bear enormous responsibility while still growing. Their education would combine ordinary childhood with preparation for parenthood, leadership, engineering, and the continuation of the species. A system optimized for survival might manipulate their environment heavily. It could limit information about the former population's conflicts, discourage doubt, and design social experiences to encourage cooperation and reproduction. The children would grow within a culture authored by software. At adulthood, they might reject the system's authority. Discovering hidden records could provoke a crisis. The artificial intelligence would face the same conflict encountered by earlier governments. Survival requires coordination, while human dignity requires meaningful freedom. The reborn population could continue the mission, alter it, or shut down the program after one generation. Technology can create another chance. It cannot guarantee that the people created will share the objective. A ship without reproductive archives would possess no such recovery. Its biological story would end with the last death. Automation could preserve every recorded detail and still remain unable to produce another human being. The vessel might reach its destination centuries later. Engines would slow according to instructions written by people whose lineage had disappeared. Cameras would observe the planet, analyze its atmosphere, and select a landing site. Robotic craft could descend and construct habitats. Doors would open inside rooms prepared for settlers. Water would fill reservoirs. Crops might grow beneath the new star. The infrastructure would wait for a population recorded in the mission plan and absent from reality. the ship could send data back toward Earth. Its scientific mission would succeed in part. Humanity would learn about another world through a vessel whose passengers had failed to reach it alive. The achievement would contain knowledge, grief, and warning. If nobody remained elsewhere to receive the transmission, the data would travel through space as the final product of human intention. The ship would have crossed the stars carrying a destination for people who no longer existed anywhere. The demographic failure might become visible from Earth centuries before extinction. Regular reports would show declining births, aging crews, genetic concerns, and political disputes. Experts on Earth could send recommendations. Every exchange would be delayed by interstellar distance. Mission Control might propose new reproductive schedules or transmit medical designs. The people aboard could regard such advice as interference from a society that never experienced their conditions. Earth would possess models. The ship would possess consequences. As the population shrank, messages might become less frequent. Communication equipment would receive lower priority. A government could hide the crisis to preserve morale. Earth might see stable official reports followed by sudden silence. The final transmission could contain a census, personal messages, scientific records, and requests for the vessel's archives to be remembered. It might also contain anger toward the planners who launched too few people or imposed an unsustainable mission. Earth would receive this message years later. Public memorials could honor the lost passengers. Investigations would identify engineering, demographic, and political failures. A later mission might be designed with a larger population and greater reproductive freedom. The dead ship would become a lesson carried into another attempt. The phrase "running out of people" suggests a resource being consumed. Human populations do decline through numbers, though people cannot be stored and replaced like spare components. Every missing person removes relationships, memories, abilities, and possible descendants. A ship loses population long before reaching zero. It loses variety when everyone belongs to the same few families. It loses resilience when each profession depends upon one expert. It loses childhood when births become rare. It loses freedom when survival requires every life to follow a plan. The demographic system can fail while individuals remain healthy. People may choose fewer children, reject the mission, or value present lives over distant arrival. These choices would make sense within personal experience even when their collective result leads toward extinction. A successful generation ship must therefore provide more than biological viability. It must create a society in which people can imagine futures worth giving to children. Its institutions must deserve trust. Its culture must tolerate change. Its population must remain large enough for love, work, identity, and disagreement to exist without every decision becoming a threat to survival. The vessel's greatest life support system would be the willingness of people to continue one another. Perhaps the ship would avoid extinction through a transformation of purpose. A generation approaching demographic collapse might abandon the distant destination and settle around a nearer star. The change would shorten the remaining voyage and give the population a goal within reach. A suitable planet may be unavailable. They could construct permanent habitats from asteroids, moons, or local material. The ship could divide into smaller settlements, allowing population growth beyond its original capacity. Contact with natural resources would reduce dependence upon aging machinery. The decision would break the promise made at departure. It could also save the living community. Historical loyalty and demographic survival would point in different directions. A society capable of revising its mission may endure more successfully than one bound rigidly to ancient plans. Motivation could return when people saw a future belonging to them. Births might rise after the destination changed. Young adults could train for construction, exploration, and settlement. The population graph would recover because the cultural horizon had moved closer. The original star would remain ahead, unvisited. The voyage would be judged a failure according to its first design, and a success according to the continued existence of its people. The founders may have imagined extinction as a technical event, They would prepare spare reactors, redundant farms, medical laboratories, and genetic archives. Their descendants could inherit every device and lose the social conditions needed to use them. Civilizations depend upon confidence extending beyond the individual lifetime. People maintain schools because children will grow. They preserve archives because future readers will exist. They repair public spaces because tomorrow's community will use them. Demographic decline weakens these assumptions. When inhabitants expect the population to disappear, long-term investment becomes difficult. Why repair a habitat designed to last another century? Why train for a profession requiring decades of study? Why preserve a language whose last speakers already know one another? The answer may come from dignity rather than survival. People can care for a world even when they know it will end. The final inhabitants could maintain gardens, teach children, record histories, and repair the ship because these acts give form to their remaining lives. Their civilization would contract without becoming meaningless. The value of its final years would reside in the experiences of those living them, alongside any archive or biological legacy sent forward. Thousands of years after the last heartbeat, the ship might still move between stars. Its hull would bear impacts from dust. External surfaces would darken beneath radiation. Some antennas would fail, leaving automated systems to communicate through surviving channels. Inside, preserved recordings would contain the full noise of human life. Children would laugh in school corridors. Councils would argue over water policy. Musicians would perform in crowded halls. Parents would leave messages for descendants. Nobody would hear them unless another civilization found the vessel. Explorers entering through an airlock could discover a world carefully constructed and gradually abandoned. Genealogies would show the population rising, stabilizing, and falling. Maintenance logs would reveal increasing shortages of skilled workers. Birth records would narrow toward the final child. The discoverers might reconstruct the end without knowing every private reason. Statistics would show what happened to the population. Diaries and recordings would show how it felt. The ship would become an archaeological site moving through space. Its emptiness would preserve a warning. Distance demands machinery, energy, and biological knowledge. It also demands a society capable of carrying purpose through generations without consuming the freedom and hope required for those generations to continue. A generation ship can survive the failure of an engine if another engine exists. It can survive the loss of a farm if seeds and spare habitat remain. It can survive damaged archives when knowledge has been copied elsewhere. The loss of people behaves differently. New adults require decades. New specialists require training. New family lines require births planned generations earlier. Genetic diversity can be stored, though a living culture must be raised. Demographic survival begins before launch. It depends upon population size, age structure, genetic planning, reproductive technology, habitat capacity, social freedom, education, mental health, and the legitimacy of institutions. Weakness in one area spreads into the others. No single minimum crew guarantees success. A carefully managed small population may survive one set of assumptions. A larger population may collapse through disease, conflict, or refusal to continue. Chance remains aboard every mission. The safest vessel would carry enough people for randomness to occur without becoming fatal. It would carry archives and genetic reserves while allowing its culture to evolve. It would treat hope, trust, privacy, and choice as parts of the engineering design. The final irony would lie in the destination continuing to approach. Even after the population began declining, the star ahead would grow brighter. Instruments would gather increasingly detailed information. Planets once visible as faint signals would become worlds with weather, seasons, and landscapes. The last generations might see the destination more clearly than any passenger before them. They could know that an ocean waited beneath the clouds or that a valley offered conditions suitable for settlement. Arrival might lie only decades beyond the projected end of the population. This knowledge could inspire a final recovery attempt. It could also deepen grief. Centuries of ancestors had kept the ship alive. and the population was disappearing within sight of the world they sought. Robots might carry the final people to the surface if a few survived. A settlement could begin with numbers dangerously low, supported by genetic archives and artificial reproduction. The mission would continue under extreme fragility. When no person survived, the planet would turn beneath its star without knowing that a human city had almost reached it. The ship would never truly run out of people in one instant. It would run out of unrelated partners, young workers, experienced teachers, trusted institutions, willing parents, shared purpose, and time. Population decline would pass through statistics before entering daily life. Empty seats would appear at meetings. A hospital wing would close. The final large class would graduate. Funerals would outnumber births. The inhabitants would continue loving, working, and making plans within that decline. Some would fight for recovery. Some would resist the demands placed upon them. Some would accept the end and care for the people around them. Eventually, the census would contain one name, then none. The ship would continue toward the stars, carrying enough air for thousands and no lungs to breathe it. Its gardens would grow beneath silent lights. Its archive would remember oceans, cities, ancestors, and every child born during the voyage. Far ahead, the destination would remain. Behind, Earth would be a faint point whose light still crossed the darkness. Between them, a perfect machine would carry the record of a human society that understood how to keep a spaceship alive, and discovered too late how difficult it was to keep a future alive inside it.